Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here today for a very important news announcement regarding a 1977 homicide case. Today, you will hear from a variety of speakers, many of which directly impacted the movement of this case. We will introduce the speakers as they come up to the podium, but in the audience, we would like to mention we have Yakima County Coroner Jim Curtis, Othram Lab Law Enforcement Liaison Representative Mike Grant, the YPD Major Crimes Unit, and also the YPD Cold Case Unit. First to the podium, we have Interim Chief of Police Sean Boyle.
Good morning, and thank you again for attending this. On a July morning in 1977, Yakima police officers responded to a report of a deceased woman located in a vehicle not far from where the Yakima Police Department is now. YPD officers found a female who had sustained a significant trauma at the time of her death. Numerous individuals were interviewed, and several tips regarding the woman's identity were received from as far away as Michigan and throughout the country. Nothing materialized to identify her or her killer. It'd be several decades after her death that scientific technology improved to the point at which meaningful progress could be made on this case. Today you will hear from those who have kept the story of our Jane Doe alive and worked tirelessly to give her a voice. Today we acknowledge the work that has been done for decades behind the scenes by the dedicated members of the Yakima Police Department, Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, Othram Laboratories, and the others who worked tirelessly to tell her story. Thank you.
Now we call to the podium Interim City Manager Dave Zabel.
Yeah, good morning. Just a few words, and it's more about the officers and forensic professionals behind this effort than it is about the case itself. I would say the first phrase that came to mind when I heard about this was dogged determination on the part of those folks, past and present. You'll hear about an awareness of evolving technology as time passed, and an amazing amount of resourcefulness. I think that was a hallmark of this case, and not only resources at the time, but resources as they evolved, and a group that kept track of things as they evolved and thought about how they might be able to leverage those to solve this issue. The 47-year-old cold case, as the chief said, of a young female whose identity would be a mystery until today. It's also about closure for a family. For almost half a century, didn't know what happened to their loved one, and now can start a healing process and bring her home. So that's good news for that family. A little reflection on 47 years ago. Forensic technology wasn't then what it is today, but YPD, past and present, from the beginning, that have worked this case using resources from around the country, staying abreast and taking advantage of emerging technology as that has advanced. And put simply, the breakthrough on this case is attributed to, in my mind, a handful of things: of professionalism, resourcefulness, of and extensive partnering, and relentless determination of YPD officers and forensic professionals working this case, past and present, right up through today. The department's long history and continued collaboration with other agencies, local, federal, state, as well as commercial labs, maintaining that awareness and use of the most current technology. The continued use of technology as advanced, and the continuous commitment on the part of these men and women, many of whom we heard from today, and a culture that puts the highest priority on life and justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zabel. Now we call to the podium Detective Kevin Kays.
Good morning, and thank you to everyone that is here to acknowledge what has been a long sought-after conclusion to the mystery of who the 1977 Jane Doe murder victim was. I'll start by giving you a brief overview of the initial response and investigation into this murder. On the morning of July 25th, 1977, an employee of the Yakima hardware store at 309 South Front Street reported to police that he smelled a distinct odor coming from a vehicle parked in the adjacent parking lot. Officer Roy Wilson responded and discovered a deceased woman in the rear of that vehicle. The body was badly decomposed and believed to have been there for at least a week. Officers and detectives located and collected a number of pieces of evidence, including clothing and other personal items, but nothing that would assist them in the identification of the deceased woman. 2 days later, an autopsy was performed by Dr. Mazzal, which gave detectives a description of what was believed to be a young female, about 18 to 25 years old, approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, and an estimated 130 pounds. The autopsy concluded that the victim had several injuries and ultimately died as a result of strangulation. The investigation, led by Sergeant Brimmer, had detectives following up leads from people believing they knew who the victim was and who was responsible. None of those leads seemed to pan out, which left investigators the task of identifying their victim. Dental records were created from the remains and compared to a number of missing women from jurisdictions around the country, but there were no matches. A number of processes consistent with the times were done in order to identify this victim. This included submitting her fingers to the FBI to be entered in the automated fingerprint index system for fingerprint analysis. Her skull and mandible were submitted to the University of Washington's Anthropology Department for possible feature identification or forensic reconstruction. Into the late 1990s, with little to go on, the investigation stalled. And as new detectives retired, new detectives picked up where they left off. And now retired Detective Dave Kellett, along with then Yakima Police Forensic Lab Supervisor Kristen Drury, they brought the case back to life in 2004. In 2022, possible related individuals were identified by our case genealogist at Otham Labs. And through dozens of phone calls and record searches with those individuals, our genealogist believed a sibling may have been located. Without knowing what the investigation entailed, this possible sibling agreed to submit their own DNA in order to assist. And his cooperation paid off, and on May 23rd, it was confirmed that he was the brother of Jane Doe. His sister is Veretta John, or Johnny, Gates, born October 21st, 1952. Evidence technician Amber Ross will speak more to the forensic processes that were taken to identify Veretta. And since then we have come to learn that Veretta was described by family as a bit of a wanderer. She was known to hitchhike from Vermont to New York, where she was from, to the West Coast and back. Veretta was known to have spent time in a hospital near Chicago in early July of 1977, less than 2 weeks before her remains were found in Yakima. Veretta's family spent decades searching for her, not ever knowing what happened to her until a few weeks ago. We have since been in contact with Veretta's brother, who continues to help in any way that he can, and we are currently assisting them with bringing Veretta home to Vermont. And although we were successful in identifying Veretta 47 years later, we are left with an unsolved murder. What I hope is that someone in our area or elsewhere recognizes her face or name and is able to reach out with information. If something about this case sounds familiar, we want to know what information you have to help hold the person or persons responsible for her murder accountable. Thank you.
Now we will call to the podium YPD's evidence technician, Amber Ross.
Good morning. Picking up the investigation in 2004 with new DNA technology that is now available, further means to identify Jane Doe were made. At the request of YPD, the Yakima County Coroner's Office exhumed the remains of Veretta Gates. Veretta's skeletal remains were sent to the King County Medical Examiner's Office for further forensic evaluation. Tissue samples and fingernails were sent to WSP to obtain a DNA profile and upload them into the Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS. WSP was not able to obtain enough quality DNA from those samples to upload into CODIS. In 2005, the femur bone was sent to the University of North Texas Health Science Center to obtain a better DNA profile. They were successful in obtaining enough quality DNA to enter the profile into CODIS. No hits were generated from that search. The profile continued to be searched in CODIS throughout the decades. In 2022, retired Detective Kellett returned to Yakima to be a part of a cold case meeting at the Yakima County Coroner's Office to to discuss the then Jane Doe case from the city of Yakima. Among those in attendance were Coroner Curtis, investigators from the Yakima County Sheriff's Office, investigators from the Yakima Police Department, retired YPD officer Vic Pesky, and members from the local media. From this meeting, it was decided to submit this case for forensic genetic genealogy, or FGG. The application was completed and submitted to the Washington State Attorney General's Office to receive a grant through a sexual assault kit initiative funded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance to fund the genetic genealogy process. The application was accepted, and Othram Labs, a private DNA lab in Texas, was selected to handle our case. As stated by Detective Case in 2024, our Jane Doe was then identified as Retta Gates.
Thank you, Amber. Now we call to the podium retired Detective Dave Kellett.
Good morning. When I was assigned to the detective division in the early 2000s, evidence tech Kristen Drury and I started going over all the open unsolved homicides. At that time, Yakima Police Department did not have a cold case unit, but Kristen and I worked these units kind of in between other jobs because we both had an interest in it. We actually had some success with revisiting these cases using UDNA technology, and in one case it led to a homicide arrest. When we came across this case, there's so little evidence. Our goal really just came to identify the victim. Contacted coroner, at that time Coroner Maury Rice, and we obtained an order to exhume the grave. We did everything we could at the time, as was mentioned, submitting DNA samples, contracting with King County forensic archaeologist at the time. However, nothing panned out and the victim remained unknown. I appreciate Detective Kays for revisiting the case, even bringing the newer technology into it. And I would like to actually anticipate a question of why would YPD put so much into this case, knowing how much of a long shot it was to not only identify this woman, but a near impossibility of ever bringing a case against somebody. Obviously, we want to provide closure to the family, but a very real respect for a murder victim highlights a very real commitment that YPD had and has still for justice, honor, and the human dignity of every victim, even when we struggle to identify them.
Thank you, Detective Kellett. Now we will call to the podium YPD's former forensic manager, Kristen Drury.
Good morning. It's always a little strange hearing my maiden name. I go by Kristen Schaefer now, so formerly known as Drury to everyone pretty much here. When I received the case in 2004 and I started reviewing it, what I saw was potential. Kellett, as he said, we spent some time going through some old files and looking at things, and I saw potential for forensic technology to be applied and used to aid in furthering this case and the identification of our 9000 Jane Doe. That's how I've known her. I've carried her with me for many, many years, and I've had no other name to say until today. I rejoice in knowing that the work I started so many years ago has had an impact and reached a resolution in this aspect of it. Resolutions like this give purpose and meaning to the work we do as forensic scientists and investigators. DNA samples were collected from Retta Gates and submitted to CODIS with no leads. There was a lot of ups and downs. Additionally, I took the time and I registered her case and information with NAMUS, the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, as well as the Doe Network, to provide a location for her to be searched for and DNA samples tested against. Retta's case is a testament to seek and ye shall find. The commitment and perseverance on the part of myself and everyone behind me has led us to this resolution and this identification in a case after 47 years. Some people, Maury Rice, a very close friend of mine, as well as Dr. Kathy Taylor, never got to hear this news and would also be rejoicing and knowing. Beretta Gates has her name back. Her story is being told and shared. Again, this is what we strive for in the work that we do to give meaning of the why. In a community with so many missing persons and unidentified, it is important to have a continued hope and to not give up. This case sat dormant for 27 years before I picked it up and started combing through it and looking for any viable evidence, which came to pass that there was nothing left from the scene. Hence my drive to have her exhumed, additional tests to be taken, and DNA samples collected. This result is what I would hold and hope for everyone in this community that still has someone missing and unidentified. The hope is that the case will advance, that it will reach a resolution. I have faith in the advancement of forensic science and the application to cold cases, and the way it's being used now renews this hope continuously. Year after year, we are developing new techniques and methods that test different types and amounts of evidence that can be used to give voices to the voiceless and identify victims and perpetrators of crimes. Forensic technology must be a part of every case, and all communities should have equal access to forensic technology to apply in casework and ensure the best outcomes and resolutions of all cases. My thanks to OFRM for their assistance and the opportunity to proudly share another success in their capabilities and aid these types of cases. I am ever thankful for their team of scientists and investigators to cross the finish line with this one and provide a resolution in identifying our Jane Doe 77-9000 Miss Beretta Gates.
Thank you, Kristen. And now we will have Detective Drew Shaw read a statement from Beretta's family.
Good morning. We are eternally grateful for the many hours and efforts of the Yakima Police Department and OFRM who have contributed to the mission of identifying Johnny and notifying us, the family. This has thankfully allowed some closure to our family after 47 years and a wound that never healed. We particularly want to thank Detective Dave Kellett, Philippians 1:6, for his commitment and perseverance. We acknowledge the professional contributions of all the many people involved in this 47-year mystery. Many thanks to the original investigators in 1977 who wrote the report and included seemingly insignificant details that do match our sister's identity. Maury Rice, the original coroner, who mentioned the small abdominal scar, which had a very personal significance. Detective Kevin Kays, evidence technician Amber Ross, and Lieutenant Chad Janice, who were instrumental in bringing this case to a close. Kristen Drury, the former Yakima Police Forensic Laboratory Supervisor, whose support and efforts started in the laboratory and extended out to the community. Thank you to the Yakima County Chief Deputy Coroner Marshall Slight and Yakima County Coroner Jim Curtis for their very essential and professional work which was necessary for the successful identification. To all those whose names I did not have but helped in a great or small way, many thanks. We are grateful. May God give us more people like you. And a special acknowledgement and thank you to Tammy Eyre, who wrote the news articles on Jane Doe 1977 with excellent journalistic expertise, sensitivity, and compassion. This case is significant in the fact that it highlights the effective teamwork of the Yakima Police Department and their willingness to embrace promising new technology in service to their community. We wish to thank Othram for all their work devoted to this case. Your methodology brings a new approach in helping solve difficult criminal justice cases. You have made immeasurable differences and improvements by cutting straight through 1 billion data points, covering millions of miles in geographic locations, and compressing 47 years in just a few weeks. Thank you for your contribution in adding integrity, reliability, and efficiency to our criminal justice system. Thank you, and God bless Mary Gates Perkins, Jeffrey Gates, and David Gates.
Thank you. Now we will call to the podium Lieutenant of the Cold Case Unit, Chad Janice.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. Before we open the room for questions, I would like to acknowledge the incredible dedication that was poured into this case for 47 years. I've had an opportunity to speak to a few people who were directly involved in this case, from the first responding officer, retired interim chief Roy Wilson, who was the first patrol officer on scene in 1977, to our current employees, Detective Kevin Hayes and evidence technician Amber Ross, and to the many others who kept the story alive throughout the years. It is a testament to the dedication and the devotion that occurs largely out of public view. While there is more work to do to bring justice to Ms. Gates' case, we are humbled and grateful to give voice to a family who has waited decades for answers. Thank you.
Thank you to all of the speakers today. Now we will open the floor for questions. We will have a roving microphone about the room for you to speak into, and if you can please state your outlet before your question and address your question to a specific representative, and they will come to the podium to answer. Do we have any questions?
Apple Valley News Now, and this is for Chad Janice. What has the department learned from this case, and what are you going to take away from it?
You know, I think one of the key points is that these cases, well, largely out of public view, they're being worked on behind the scenes, and as everybody knows, over the last year we've created a volunteer unit. We have many of our volunteers in the room present today that are working on some of these cold cases, and the big thing is, one, giving voice to the family, picking up the phone, letting the families know that you're still in our lives. We haven't forgotten about you. We have identified around 70 cases since about 1974 that are cold case homicides. In addition, there's another number of missing persons in that same time period. And what all of these detectives and our volunteers are able to do is just reach out to them and let them know, hey, we're still thinking about you. You're still in our lives. We still know who you are. And then as leads come up, as new technology arises, some of those cases are being reprocessed at different forensic labs, and we go through them again. So there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes on most days that this group is together.
Non-stop local for any of the detectives that are still working. What was the one piece of DNA that managed to actually identify Gates? Was there a certain piece that did it more than others?
So the key evidence that we used was part of the femur bone and other worked evidence from other of the labs that we had sent stuff to. So Othram was able to get a profile that was good enough to search into the databases, and they came up with leads and were able to work it that way.
Apple Valley News Now again. This is for whoever would have the most recent information on the case. Have you guys reached out to the Chicago Police Department to see if they have any similar cases from around the time she disappeared from there?
That's still something that we're in the process of. We are looking into trying to get records from the hospital that she was at to see if she potentially left with someone or something like that, or had a next of kin that she provided that could potentially lead to somebody to go speak with. But those are all things that are kind of lined up for us to do. So yes.
Apple Valley News now. Could you expand a little bit on the grant that you received from the Attorney General's office and how that assisted in moving the investigation forward?
So the Washington State Attorney General's office offers a grant through the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative to help identify suspects or victims of crimes that were sexual in nature or potentially were sexual in nature. And so we reached out to them and were able to fill out the paperwork, work with some very helpful people in the Attorney General's office to obtain a list of labs that they are able to work very easily with, and Offer happened to be one of them. And they took care of all of the monetary portion of it. When additional testings or anything like that were needed, they stepped right up and were very helpful in being able to pay for everything.
Not that I need a microphone. My voice is always loud. Lance from KIT Radio. First of all, I missed, how old was she when she died? Do you know?
She was 25 years old.
She was 25, all right. Is there a message for the killer out there from any of you?
I think this the killer involved in this case and any of the other cold cases or unsolved homicides, be aware that our detective division is working tirelessly to identify the people responsible for these cases, and we working with the prosecutor's office to hold them accountable. So I think if you are a person that was involved in a violent crime in our city, the detective division, along with the other members of the organization, are going to work very hard to hold you accountable, and be aware that we may come knocking at your door to your day in court will be held, and the families will have to see justice done for their loved one.
10 years ago, when you guys were working on a case like this, you certainly didn't have the tool chest you have now, right? So in 10 years, I mean, we're just going to be that much farther ahead.
Right. I think it's been mentioned up here, but our department is continually looking for advances in technology and other investigative processes that'll help us solve the unsolved homicides as well as the ones that come in. And the new homicides, we're able to work the case and create a better case for the prosecutor's office to be able to hold the person accountable. You see a lot of realistic guilty pleas that come through the prosecutor's office, because that's the hard work and dedication of the officers and the detectives that put together a case that's very winnable for the prosecutor's office, and they choose to acknowledge their involvement in crimes and be sentenced and held accountable through the criminal justice system.
For anyone in the cold case unit, does identifying gates get you closer to finding a suspect? And with the time that passed, does that punishment kind of change for that suspect when you get caught?
Certainly, this moves the case much further along in the investigative process than we were able to do before we knew Mrs. Gates' story. Now with that, we can start to build a timeline of what was going on in her life as best as we possibly can, given it's been almost 50 years since her identity has been known. And so in terms of identifying a suspect, we're at phase one of bringing closure to this case. We have a name, and we have, in most cases, we have a name during the event, and in this case, we've had to wait 47 years for it. But that's okay. That doesn't remove the tireless work that's going to occur behind the scenes by all of our investigators. And as they comb through now this known life of a person and where they were in our world and in the country back in 1977, and as tips come along, if there's new investigative leads, just understand we will follow up on those, and that'll be our duty moving forward from today.
Apple Valley News now. Is there any evidence from the time that may suggest, I mean, there were several prolific serial killers who were operating throughout Washington State at the time when her body was found. Is there any indication that it could possibly fit one of those serial killers' profiles, especially the ones that were targeting young women?
At the time, we were very aware of, as you mentioned, some prolific serial killers, and it doesn't quite fit in the timelines of the famous ones, but we are aware, and now that we have a name, I would imagine the very capable detectives in the cold case unit are going to look at those, look at the locations, especially where she's from, because that opens up a whole new avenue of possible serial killers that operated on the East Coast as well. And so those are all avenues that I'm sure they're going to take part, which we tried as well as we could back then. But having a name is huge in finding out and figuring out who this person was, call a profile of the victim, to try to identify who they were with and who their killer might be.
Apple Valley News now. Are there any other cases that are currently pending funding for some sort of extra DNA analysis? I know you got the grant from the State Attorney General's office for this one, but are there any other cases that could potentially be solved if you just had the money to be able to do a take similar steps as you did with this case?
Out of respect for the integrity of some of those cases, we are constantly evaluating cases, sending cases out for re-examination. We do have a handful of cases that are always at different labs doing different things, and as that information comes back to us, and of course if we receive information like this on any number of those cold cases, then we'll do something very similar to this. But funding, of course, this is very expensive technology, as one can imagine, and so we do appreciate the assistance of the AG's office under the Saki grant in this particular case and any other funding sources, because this is very expensive evidence to process. As you can imagine, we received the genealogy report 2 years ago, and it was 2 years later before we had an identification. So always combing through cases, look for opportunities to resubmit evidence as advancements continue to happen.
Apple Valley News now. Is there any way for people, if they are interested in contributing or helping out with the funding for that type of DNA analysis, is there any way, something that people can donate to, or any way that the public can help if they don't have information about a particular case but they want to do something to assist you?
I don't have an answer for that right now. We don't have a mechanism to accept donations within the Yakima Police Department, but if there is another source within the community willing to do that, we'd love to partner with them.
Again, in the cold case unit, are there any other cases being worked on right now? Do you have a number? And how does solving this Gates case help with those other ones?
I'm sorry, this is the question.
In the cold case unit, with the other cases being worked on, how does solving this Gates case help those other ones move along, and how many others are there?
Like Lieutenant Jenny said, we have a number of cold cases, unsolved murders, and even more missing persons that are just never been found to go on top of that. You know, in the respect that it helps us move along, it gives us hope to keep moving. You know, this is a good success. Obviously, it's still an unsolved murder, but it's, you know, something positive that helps us say, okay, we can get to the next step on this case. Maybe we can get to the next step on the next case too.
Apple Valley News now. This is for anyone who wants to speak to this. What does this teach you about the value of individual police officers, individual people within the police department, and when people take on something as a passion or look at something and say that they're going to, you know, keep going no matter what? I mean, what is that feeling that you guys have?
I think any everyone at the Yakima Police Department, no matter what it is their passion is for, it may be DUI enforcement, it may be homicide investigation, drug enforcement. We have a lot of very passionate employees, in not just in the commission rank, but the non-commissioned ranks. And having the ability to hire those people and keep them and retain them is vital to having a very successful police department. But having the opportunity to be a leader in the organization, it's very satisfying on my part that we have those individuals in the department, and hopefully we continue to get more of those and continue not looking for the right word, but the professionalism that's done by the police department, the great reputation that the members of our department have. So I think all of us have our passion, and some of it's not in law enforcement, but hiring those people, and they'll continue to take on these challenges. And I mean, looking at 20 years, it's hard to believe it's been 20 years that this has been from the time that Kristen and Dave took this on. And when you start talking 2004, it doesn't seem like 20 years, but I think we're all getting older. So.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would just add to the chief's comments that, of course, we have a retired detective behind us. Those that are in the department today, not taking anything away from their commitment. They're professional police officers, and that's their job. We have volunteers now, and we have a group of them in the back I want to acknowledge too, retired detectives, retired YPD, that are doing this because of that very passion that the chief mentioned. So thank you, gentlemen back there, for your continued care about our community.
KIMA Action News. I have a couple of questions. Just kind of jumping back to the suspect part of everything. I know it doesn't sound like you guys have a suspect as of right now. At this moment in time, and this is for any detective, do we have any leads as of right now to a potential suspect in this case?
I guess the short answer is no. We're lacking a lot of evidence in this case. We're lacking any evidence that would help really guide us to a particular person. And that's what the hope was in this case, was identifying our victim. Putting a name to her would help lead us to other individuals that either knew her or had associated with her, traveled around the country with her, that would help lead us to some other piece of information to help lead to a resolution.
I guess Detective Hayes, while you're up there, I know you guys, the Yakima Police Department, at least highlight one cold case every month on your guys' Facebook page, and I know there is dozens of cold cases here in the city of Yakima. So getting this one solved, how does it feel to be able to finally get this case solved and be able to get that, be able to bring justice to both Veretta and her family and be able to move forward with this case?
It definitely feels good, but the way I look at it is it's still an unsolved murder. So that's the finish line for me.
For non-stop local, for whoever might be the person to ask, let's say the suspect is found this year. Does that punishment change versus if they were caught that same day?
Homicide is one of the type of crimes in Washington State that does not have a sunset clause, so the statute of limitation remains open throughout the eternity in essence. So while we don't know if the suspect in this case is alive currently, we will continue to work through leads, any that come up. Of course, we're hoping that somebody sees Miss Veretta Gates' picture somewhere in the country, and which is why we have all of our media folks here. We're hoping that somewhere in the country somebody identifies her and says, I know that person, and I'm going to call Detective Gaze and the cold case unit at Yakima Police Department, and we'll move this case even 1 inch further is always the goal.
I'm Gina Hernandez, just a nosy Yakima resident, and I'd like to ask, whomever it applies, what you can tell us about the vehicle in which she was found. Obviously, you said we don't have any clues for the perpetrator in this instance, but do we have a registration, anything?
Oh yeah, the Chevy Apache was owned by OIC, but it was what we would consider a relic of the scene. It was non-running. It was just a convenient place. It was unlocked. It wasn't capable of being locked. It was just a convenient place to dump a body. And so it really had nothing to do with the murder. It had been parked there for like 6 months up until that time.
Apple Valley News Now. I was wondering if you could specify for people who may not watch the majority of this press conference or who might not know, if people are thinking back, what years and what locations are you looking for? Like Chicago 1977, people who were in Yakima in 1977. Like where and when do people need to think back to when they're trying to remember if they've seen her?
I mean, obviously those two specific spots, the last known place before she was here, and anywhere in between. We know she was hitchhiking back and forth across the country, primarily to Northern California. Her family eventually got her reported as a missing person in 2002. So she was reported missing to the Berkeley, California PD as a missing person, with very little information other than, she had gone missing in 1977. That was the last time the family had any contact with her. So, we've got a very large span of space to try to figure out where she traveled and potentially who she was with.
Follow-up question to that. Do you know when and where she started her journey on this particular trip?
I don't have the specific date, but it was in early July of '77, just within a couple of weeks of her discovery.
Are there any other locations that you know of where she was seen, where people might have interacted with her and maybe might have heard where she was planning to go next, or people she might have been planning to meet with?
No, and I think the reason behind that is because nobody knew who she was. Had we had a name, immediately, that sort of information could have been put out to see if someone knew who she was or had traveled with her. But without that, it was pretty limited in what we could do. Her body was very decomposed, and so being able to recognize her was not possible. So without an ID, there was nobody to provide a picture of what her current or what she was supposed to look like. So it was difficult from the get-go.
I did have one more follow-up question. Just dealing with, trying to think about the nature of the suspect. A lot of times this is a fact that matters, and you had said that there are, that for the funding for the Attorney General's office, it's either a victim who has been sexually assaulted or suspected possibly sexually assaulted. In this case, is there a belief that she may have been sexually assaulted?
Yes, there's some information which I don't know if they really want out, but she was found essentially nude. I think she had a sock on and a bra around her neck, and that was it. And that's so that the evidence was that she was violently sexually assaulted, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Any final questions from any of the other outlets? We'll take one more question.
KIMA Action News. This is just a clarifying question. I know Detective Hayes had mentioned, people here didn't really know her, so I'm going to assume that she didn't really have any family or friends here in the city of Yakima. Is that the case?
Yeah, what we understand is that she does have family in the Spokane area, but no one was ever here in Yakima.
Thank you. Tammy Yakima Herald Republic. Were her skull and mandible ever returned at the University of Washington?
Unfortunately, no, they were not. At this time, we're not exactly sure who has or has had it in the past.
Should they have returned it?
They should have, yes.
One of the parts of that is knowing when she was exhumed that there was not a skull, and that was actually a surprise to the investigators. And the information was that Dr. Muzal, the original coroner, had sent the skull for a forensic reconstruction to, I don't remember the name of the professor who was doing kind of groundbreaking facial reconstruction on skeletal remains. And there it kind of fell off the radar. We actually contracted with Kathy Taylor of King County, the forensic archaeologist from King County, to go to the University of Washington and search for her skull using pictures from the autopsy. And she was unsuccessful, and we're in finding out. The professor has passed away. We know that his collection was donated to the Smithsonian. So we're actually in touch with this, I know that they're in touch with the Smithsonian Institute to try to locate, and back to the University of Washington to try to locate that skull.
For timing purposes, we want to thank everybody for taking time out of your day to join us for this very important news conference. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out to us, but we will conclude here. Thank you very much.
Take a photo?
Yeah, your photo.
We have the cold case